Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back again to Weightage CFA lecture preview. Tonight we are going to have the preview on this topic, which is called the capital structure. And guess who is with us tonight? We have Mr. Eric Ko, also one of our favorite lecturer. Yeah, and of course, after Eric's sharing later, we will also have Mr. Beng Hui, the Managing Director of AB Maximus, to join us in to share a bit of the CFA program information as well as to handle the Q&A. So let us welcome Mr. Eric.
Thank you, Michelle, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for spending your time with us here. What I'm going to share with you here is a very simplified, brief preview of what typically happens in a sample lecture. Okay. Of course, there's no substitute for hard work and internalization, but we all know that things are getting very challenging. What we then try to offer you is to enhance your learning effectiveness. Okay, and I hope that I'll be able to illustrate some of these examples in a moment. Okay, so we typically have the starting point with a learning outcome statement, and a typical class may have about 4 or 5 learning outcome statements. But just for today's purpose, we'll just look at one LOS. Okay, so in this example, we are going to compare the capital structure considerations. Okay, what are the capital structure considerations in two kinds of situations, in a perfect market versus an imperfect capital market? So to recap, almost all of you, I believe, would have already passed your CFA level 1. So a quick recap. What do we mean by a capital structure? Well, it sounds like a big word, but all it is actually about your proportionate mix of financing. What is the proportion of liability or debt financing versus what is the portion of equity financing, right? And a good corporate finance manager would have in his mind the primary goal is to minimize the WACC, weighted average cost of capital. You minimize the WACC so that you can maximize the value of the firm, and therefore you maximize the shareholders' wealth. And to recap, what is WACC, weighted average cost of capital, is simply the proportion of the firm's financing from debt and the proportion or the weightage from the equity multiplied by the respective costs. Let me see if I can get the pen right. Okay, I've got it. So some of you may remember you have weightage coming from the debt, which is here. Okay, multiplied by cost of debt. But because of the tax deductibility, we have this, right? So some people use this notation, plus the weightage of the equity multiplied by the cost of the equity. Okay, you note that the stuff that we see here, the RD, the RE, all these things are in terms of the marginal cost. Similarly, the tax here is also the marginal tax rate. Okay, the rest of it is quite self-explanatory. Debt means the market value of the debt, and E is the market value of equity. The firm's value is essentially the market value of the assets, and hence is a summation of the D and the E. Right, let's move on. So let's look at capital structure considerations in a perfect market to begin with. Now, there were these two well-known personalities in finance. Their names were Modigliani and Miller. Modigliani and Miller. So we abbreviate using M&M. M&M came out with two propositions. The first proposition is this: in a perfect market, it does not matter how your firm's financing is structured, how your capital structure is done, whether you have 100% debt, 0% equity, or you reverse it the other way around, 100% equity, 0% debt. It doesn't matter. It doesn't affect the firm's value. Okay, so M&M's proposition number one, which I put right at the bottom of the screen, the firm's market value is not altered by the firm's capital structure. So as a manager, if you want to add value to the firm, you do other things, but you do not get to add value to the firm's value by merely fiddling around with the capital structure. Now, what are the underlying assumptions in the perfect capital market to have this proposition one whole? They are listed here. There are 6 of them. Okay. Among them is that one very big clue is there are no transaction costs. There are no taxes, there are no transaction costs, there's no bankruptcy costs. And we'll go through this in a moment. Okay. People have similar expectations. And I won't go through the rest of the details. I will just focus primarily on this because why? You'll get to see it soon. So we said that there are 2 propositions that M&M came up with. The first of which is firm's market value in a perfect capital market is not affected by capital structure. Capital structure does not matter. What then is the second M&M proposition? The second proposition is as follows. Now, recall that your weighted average cost of capital, the WACC, is simply this, right? So, if you were to move around and manipulate the equation, you can express it in the following method. RE, the cost of equity, is R0 plus R0 minus RD multiplied by D over E. It sounds scary, it sounds long, but let's see if we can simplify our interpretation of this formula. What it says here is your cost of equity is driven by this thing. The higher your debt to equity ratio, the higher the cost of equity, right? And that's why we say RE is a linear function of D over E. Now, does this make intuitive sense? The reasoning is this. The more you borrow, the more the firm borrows, the more the firm's cash flow will have to be committed to the external debt holders because the firm is subject to contractual obligations, right? So what that means is that the equity holders, the residual holders, will be subject to higher and higher risks as the firm increases its leverage, as the firm increases its proportion of D over E. If you as an equity holder or potential equity holder of this company sees that there's increased risk, what then do you do? Definitely you will require a higher rate of return and therefore the RE goes up. So that is the intuitive explanation behind this formula. Okay. I will not go through this part, although in a typical lecture, we will have other graphs and numbers to talk about. This merely gets you to see that if the intercept is 9%, and if the cost of debt is 6%, you'll notice that as the debt to equity ratio goes up, what happens is as the cost debt to equity ratio goes up, you will find that of equity or required rates of return on the part of the equity holders go up because they will perceive that they are subject to higher risk. Okay. Now, as a corollary, there is another set of formula. Yeah, more formula to remember. But the good news is actually we can simplify this formula because there's a lot of similarity with the earlier formula that we saw. Okay, so all this says is that the beta of the assets, you notice you can see a very close parallel to this thing here, right? To the WACC over here. And the beta of the asset overall for the firm is equivalent to the weightage of the debt. Notice here I've underlined, multiplied by the beta of the debt plus the weightage of the equity multiplied by the beta of the equity. And you'll notice here, let me try to use a different color. Hopefully technology works. Okay, I will use, let's say a green color instead. Okay, you'll see here, all you did is you just change from RD to beta D, and over here, you just change from RE to beta E. So actually, there's no real new formula, so to speak. Okay. And the other formula also follows through like this. So as debt over equity goes up, the beta on the part of the equity holders also go up because of the higher risk, and therefore the beta goes up. Now, people then question M&M and say, you guys must be crazy. You live in an unreal world. Which country in this world doesn't have taxes? As people say, death and taxes are the two only certainties in life, right? So let's see if M&M's proposition can be modified, can be refined to include a real world phenomenon, which is taxes. We discussed earlier on that in a perfect capital market, the firm's value in a levered position, the L here stands for levered, means with some form of borrowing, is the same as the firm's value in an unlevered position, right? We say that we cannot add value to the firm merely by changing the capital structure. So now, if there are taxes, what happens? Let's see. If there are taxes, we need to add on this item, which is what we call the present value of. There will be a few more slides in between. I just cut it short. In essence, what do we mean by this interest tax shield? In a world with taxes, if the firm borrows, what would the firm have to pay? The firm will have to pay interest, right? The firm will have to pay interest. When the firm pays interest, its profit before tax goes down, And guess what? Its tax cash flow would also go down. So these are things that will help add value to the firm as compared with a firm that is 100% equity-based financing. Okay? I won't go through the further technical details behind the formula. All I'm just showing you here is that if the firm borrows, the firm pays interest, it is able to add value because it has some tax savings as compared with a 100% equity finance firm. Therefore, the firm's value in a levered position is higher, and the value add is represented by this TD, tax rate multiplied by the debt amount. Now, how then does it affect the other items like the WACC and the RE? I put some plasters here, and I'm going to peel off the plaster one by one. Okay, so the WACC in a perfect capital market situation is the weightage of debt multiplied by cost of debt plus the weightage of equity multiplied by cost of equity, right? Now, with taxes, with tax in the picture, this is all we need to do. Very simple, just multiply by 1 minus t. What do we mean by multiply by 1 minus t? Remember just now we said that when we borrow, we pay interest. And effectively, interest will reduce our tax, right? So if, let's say, the RD interest rate is, let's come out with a hypothetical 10%. Marginal interest rate is 10%. Marginal cost of borrowing is 10%. And if your tax rate is 20%, marginal tax rate, effectively, your cost of borrowing is no longer 10%, but it is 10%, which is just about 8%. Second formula on WACC. You get to reduce your WACC if you have the third item here is also no surprise. All you need to do is add on this additional term. The rest of the items in the formula is exactly the same as in the perfect capital market situation. Now, what does all this mean? We are talking about capital structure considerations, right? A good corporate finance manager would want to maximize the firm's value, right? And we say that hypothetically, theoretically, in a world with taxes, the firm's value will go up as you borrow more and more and more. So you might as well maximize this, and you borrow almost at 100% debt so that you maximize the tax savings. Is that the end of today's lecture? Almost there, just bear with me for a while because there's yet another story. Now, so far, we summarize it as follows, and I put it into this matrix, right? We have two propositions from M and N. In a world which is perfect, without taxes, capital structure doesn't matter. So the firm's value in a levered position is the same as that in an unlevered position. And the second proposition is that the cost of equity goes up as your debt to equity goes up or as your leverage goes up. In a world with taxes, all you do is, let's peel off the plaster, just plus TD, which is the interest tax shield. And in the second line, all you need to do is just multiply by 1 minus t. So that's the summary so far. with just one more item to go through. Okay, perhaps you want to try out this question. Okay, and I'll just cut short a bit in the interest of time. This company has the current capital structure equity and debt, right? And 65%. Tax will drop from 28 to 25%. And next year, they want to move their capital structure to 40% equity and 60% debt, right? The question looks a bit long-winded, and we should be prepared for more long-winded questions in the CFA exam. That's how they intend to challenge you. But we can simplify by breaking it down. The question here is that arising from these changes, what's the most likely effect on the cost of equity? Will it drop? Is it uncertain, or will it go up? Now, there are two things to consider. The first thing to consider is this. Typically, in this kind of situation, we say there are taxes. In this kind of situation, you notice that the debt proportion or weightage of debt has come down. So you would expect that the value of the firm may potentially come down, right? Because we said that VL equals to VU plus TD. So now the problem is the D, if I can change the color, the D may potentially come down. So if the proportion of D comes down, there is a risk that VL may come down. But at the same time, you also notice that the tax rate has also come down. Okay? So we do not know which impact will offset which. If the tax rate were to go up, of course, the the value add will increase. Okay? So the answer is that there is uncertainty. So in a typical class, we'll give you some time to try out and reflect, and then we'll just get together and go through the answer and explain it by breaking it down, which looks something like this. I mentioned just now that we have one last item, and this last item is financial distress. We mentioned just now also that the value of a levered firm was VU, and then plus this will increase the firm's value, borrow almost 100%. So I don't want you to leave tonight's session thinking that you should go to your bosses and say, bosses, you should borrow 100%. And your bosses will immediately sack you. So please don't do that. Why is that the situation? Because we know that in the real world, besides taxation, you also have this thing called the cost of financial distress. You cannot borrow too much. If you borrow too much, you will subject your firm to lots of potential problems. And just to summarize, there are two categories of financial distress here. The first is the direct cost of financial distress. And the second is perhaps the indirect or indirect cause of financial distress. I will not go through in detail, but I will just very briefly explain to you what we mean by the direct cause of financial distress. Now, let's say, just as an illustration, let's say your firm has $100 worth of assets, okay? And let's say your firm goes into a stage where it goes into financial distress and it files for bankruptcy. So what's going to happen is effectively, the lenders are going to say, in very simple terms, sell off your assets and distribute the 100 to us, right? To the debt holders, and if there's any balance, the equity holders. But guess what? Usually the priority is to the debt holders, and if there's any balance, you give to the equity holders. But above these two groups of people, there's another group who will get hold of the money first. Who are these people? Effectively, they are the lawyers, the accountants, and the various regulatory bodies. When you dispose your assets of this $100, before you can even touch the proceeds of the $100, maybe, let's say hypothetically, $10 or so goes to this group of people, your lawyers, your accountants, and the various regulatory bodies. What that means is that these guys effectively have access only to the remaining 90. So this $10 is what we call the direct cause of financial distress. Okay? So what it means then is that, hey guys, let's be real. We cannot go on to borrow 100% because if we borrow too much, cost of financial distress will come in and it will hamper the firm's value. There's also the indirect cause of financial distress. What are these? These are the fears and the concerns and the anxieties that will affect the running of the business. For instance, if you borrow too much, news will spread around like wildfire, right? Your suppliers and your customers may be worried about whether you've gone mad, whether your firm will be a sustainable going concern business. So you may find that there may be fewer investment opportunities, there may be fewer business transaction opportunities. So we cannot afford to go crazy and borrow 100%. Okay, so these are some examples of items that may influence bankruptcy as well as the probability of financial distress. So to sum up, what they have done is to summarize in this equation or this formula, which is also called the trade-off theory. What are we trading off? You are trading off between two things. And I put two pieces of plasters now. The first is, remember we said, when there are taxes, you might as well borrow 100%. And therefore, you maximize the firm's value. But you need to trade off with the cost of financial distress. And that's how it looks like. If you borrow too much, this part goes up. If this part goes up because it's a negative, because it erodes the firm's value, it is not exactly a good proposition. So you need to do a balancing act between enhancing your firm's value when you borrow versus considering the fact that when you borrow too much, the cost of financial distress problem kicks in. Okay, so that's all there is in terms of the trade-off theory, and it is also illustrated in a diagram like this. So just to recap, we have talked about capital structure consideration in the perfect world, then we say this is not realistic. Let's say this world has taxes. What do we do? Effectively, well, borrow as much as you can. Why? Because as you borrow more and more and more, you have the interest tax shield and it will enhance the firm's value. All right? But we then say in the real world, not only do you have taxes, you also have financial distress costs. So the financial distress costs will increase as you borrow more and more and more. And therefore, we have this trade-off theory, which is like this. So you'll see that in this situation, when you start off with very low debt to equity ratio, it makes sense for you to borrow more and more and more because it will enhance the firm's value. But there will come a point in time when the marginal benefit that you get from this interest tax shield, you have to consider how much of this is eroded by the increasing cost of financial distress. And therefore, at some point in time, the firm's value will decline. So what then is the optimal capital structure? The optimal capital structure is the point here, which is maximizing the firm's value. Where do you maximize the firm's value? As in your typical economics, you have your marginal revenue equals to marginal cost. In this case, the marginal benefit that you get from the interest tax shield is exactly the same as the marginal cost that you get from the financial distress cost. And that's where you maximize the firm's value. So I hope I've given you a rough idea as to how a typical lecture may look like. And I hope it has benefited you in helping you to consider how you want to plan your studies going forward. And I think I'll pass the time back to Michelle, right? Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thanks a lot, Eric. So I will just share my screen right now. What I want to do really is to just provide some tips for level 2 candidates. So, okay, let's go. Okay, just want to make sure that the audience can see my screen, right? Okay, great. I'm going to just enlarge. Okay, so just a very quick introduction about us for some of you who may not be familiar. So we've been working with the Sunway test for the past 10 years already. So as a company, we started out in the late 1990s. So we've been running CFA prep programs for more than 2 decades now. Right. So you also notice that this program that we run in Malaysia is a partnership between Sunway Test, ourselves, AB Maximus, and also Wiley. So Wiley is our content partner. So the materials that the lecturers use, they are from Wiley. Okay, so here's a slide showing a number of candidates. So what I want to just share on this one is not just the absolute number, wow, a lot of people taking the program, but really this points towards the competition that's out there in the market for jobs and for opportunities. So right now, even in the current environment, of course, it's very challenging. But when things pick up, of course, job market will pick up again. But then, you have several 100,000 candidates taking the CFA program, and actually more than half of them are based in Asia Pacific, so right in our backyard. Okay, so here comes the tips part a little bit. So the 2020 and 2021 curriculum is the same, right? So whatever materials that is from 2020 and 2021, it remains the same. So CFA Institute actually released some information about curriculum changes back in 2020. So I just want to bring this up again, especially for the audience here who are taking level 2 exams this year, and of course level 3 very soon. So what I've highlighted in bold on the slide here is that ethics case. Okay, the ethics case in 2020 for level 1, level 2 and 3 is almost entirely fresh. Okay, so it means they have changed the case studies in the CFA Institute text. This is significant, I would say very, very significant, because for as long as we've been doing this program, more than 20 years, I don't recall that the main case book was changed in that 20 years, right? So this is really, really okay. Not to say that CFA Institute doesn't update its syllabus, as all of you have heard from us and from elsewhere, on an annual basis in a normal year, not the pandemic year, the CFA curriculum is updated, right? Everything except ethics. Ethics has been remain very, very stable. And from time to time, although the CFA Institute updates the standards of practice, but the cases that they use has been around for a long, long time. Okay, so this is big news for me. So do pay attention to these revised or new cases. So therefore, it will be useful when you're doing your reading or revision, when you're revising the ethics topic. I would recommend that you also look at the CFA Institute official text because of these revised cases. Okay. Then specifically for level 2, there were 5 new readings being introduced. And this thing about the new readings, whether it is on this slide or the previous one that talk about level 3 changes, what is interesting, or what I find, is that if I were the examiner, I would tend to make use of new material in my assessment. That is what I would typically do for our assessments that we run or that we prepare, in this part of the world, right? But of course, I can't speak for CFA Institute, but you tend to use new materials if you get my point. Okay, so do pay attention more to the new materials, especially. Yeah, so anyway, we do set assessments here in Singapore, and for regulatory exams here in Singapore, Malaysia, and Brunei. Okay, anyway, so the exam weightage for level 2, that kind of like pretty constant the last couple of years. So as you know, or you've been following the CFA exam weightage level 2, there always been a range. It's not exactly like, okay, 10% or 15%, but 10 to 15% for ethics, and likewise for all of the other topics. So this way of allocating the weightage for level 2 and 3 has been around for some time. There is a range. For level 1, it used to be a fixed percentage for level 1, but starting from 2020, that has become a range. Okay, so this is something new, but more for level 1 candidates. So this gives the flexibility to the examiner how they want to juggle around the number of questions, right, among the different topics. So this gives more flexibility. Okay, so a bit on the dates that we have. So the Sunway Test program with AB Maximus is starting actually this weekend for level 2. So at this particular year is slightly compressed, right? Slightly compressed because the exam date is actually earlier, right? It is at the end of May instead of uh, early part of June. So it's slightly earlier exam date. So therefore, our exam preparation timetable is slightly, very slightly compressed for level 2. But we feel that this will be adequate for preparation if you start right now, this week, right, in preparing. Okay, so of course, we hope that you will sign up with us. If you have any questions, uh, feel free to reach out to Michelle and, of course, our colleagues. Then this is my last slide before the contact information. So if you've been following our program for level 1, it is actually the same formula, basically. Essentially, we prefer candidates to pre-read before coming for classes, attend the classes. If you miss the classes, then there are the Wiley videos available on the Wiley portal that we provide. So all the class participants will be provided with study guide from Wiley, will be provided with the access to the Wiley portal, whereby you can access the videos, practice questions, and so on. Okay, so this is our is no magic formula, right? Pre-read, attend classes, or watch videos, or do both, and then practice, practice, practice. Now, the thing about the regular weekly or fortnightly classes, depending on where you take the classes, um, the focus is on understanding the material, right? Focus is on understanding the material, but not necessarily remembering, the learning outcomes or the formula, right? We save that for the revision, right? So during regular season, regular classes, focus on understanding, right? Practice, not sure, ask. So as you know, we have that WhatsApp group that we set up for the class participants. So anytime during the day, evening, nighttime, you are not sure, ask, and then we will, as you know, sometimes there's a peer support from the other classmates, and of course, we do have our um, instructors standing by to give you the guidance. Okay, so that's the preparation uh, formula, if you will. And of course, if you want to know more, not sure, feel free to send us an email. Depending on where you are, you can send the emails to Andrew, to Raymond, and of course, back here in Malaysia, you can contact Michelle for more information. So whether it's about signing up, registration forms, about today's presentation, questions, not sure, uh, happy to answer them. So with that, thank you very much for your attention. We would like to open the floor for your questions. Thank you. Okay, so you guys can actually pose your questions on the Facebook. Oh, scholarship. Okay. Okay, so the CFA Institute actually does provide scholarships to defray the cost of the exam fee, right? So, and all these will be administered by the local chapter or local society. So in Malaysia, that will be CFA Institute Malaysia or CFA Malaysia. So if you can just Google cfamalaysia.org, you will get the contact information there. And then you can reach out to CFA Malaysia and ask how you can apply for a scholarship. Yeah, so there is actually a scholarship offered by CFA Institute. So along the same lines about support, financial support. So some Weightage does offer, I believe, discounts for its alumni, as well as if you are a staff of corporates that are supported by Sunway, you will also get, you know, discounts. And of course, students coming back, they are also alumni, right? Yeah, that's correct. Okay. Any questions for Eric? Technical questions? Yeah. Yeah, don't be shy. Yeah, we have a couple of more minutes of your time. But in case you don't get to ask, no worries. You can always reach out through the emails. If I can ask Michelle to the colleagues to actually flash the email contact again on the screen, then the audience can catch it. Yeah, yeah. Thank you, thank you. So at this stage in level 2, I guess many of you are already transitioning or trying to get into the finance industry. So it's important to start making the move now or start preparing for it now. Don't wait until level 3 or don't wait until you've completed the exams. Try to, firstly, it chalks up that 48 months of experience. Secondly, uh, and personally, I feel that at the higher levels, it is helpful that you are somewhat connected to the industry or working in the industry. I find that especially for level 3, it is very helpful if you are working in the industry because sometimes, in order to understand what the examiner is trying to ask, um, being in the industry helps put you in that right frame of mind, I suppose. Yeah. But in the event that you are not able to get into the industry yet, no worries. We would also encourage you to network with your classmates, especially if your classmates are already from the industry, because I think you guys noticed that, especially for those who are from our level 1 class, you know that, amongst the classmates, there'll be some who are in the industry. Then, sometimes you may get an interview and then you can ask your classmates, hey, how is it like, uh, how to prepare for the interview, and so on and so forth. So sometimes your classmates can actually give you some good tips. And of course, our instructors will also share with you some tips. So this network thing of being part of a group or class is not purely just for the study purposes, but also it helps with your career. It also helps some peer sharing and so on. Yeah. Okay. Do you help place CFA graduates to employers? Okay. So from time to time, some of our lecturers, we do have some openings available that we come across. So then we will share that with the class as well. But of course, we don't really do like a headhunting kind of service. But we do, whenever we come across, we share that with the class. So at the same time, one of our affiliates in Singapore. Anyway, I'm based in Singapore, and Eric is based in KL. So one of our affiliates in Singapore, he actually runs. Okay, I mean he's an equity manager by day, but he has a hobby that he runs like a career coaching thing as a sideline, right? So for him, he will also share some of these openings and tips from time to time with our students as well. Yeah, but we don't do a headhunting service at this moment. Yeah, but what I also do recommend is get connected with CFA Malaysia. Even if you are not a full member yet, as a candidate, you can actually join their network, attend their events, and CFA Malaysia, and of course the bigger CFA Institute organization, they do have a job portal or job board. I think the global one has, but the local one no. There's a job board that you can actually find opportunities that are available. I guess the opportunities are regional, not just restricted to Malaysia. So I think that will be helpful, especially Malaysia is known as the one of the biggest net exporters of CFA. Yeah, because many of the candidates when they complete, they actually eventually work in another market like myself, right? Working in Singapore, right? It's true, right? Malaysia is the one of the biggest net exporter.
Actually, just latching on Beng Hui's remark regarding the job market, right? If I recall correctly, I think the CFA Malaysia Society is getting more active now, and there are some portions in there that talk about job opportunities. I mean, I get to see it as a member, but I presume that even if you are so-called an affiliate member or if you are a candidate, I presume that you can still have access to it. So as
Yeah,
Beng, please take the opportunity. Sometimes there are webinars. Those days we have the makan makan. Now we have webinars. Even then, we can still find opportunities to network.
yeah, definitely. I think there are about 800 over members, uh, in Malaysia. So it's actually it's not a very big community, but it's a very nice, very friendly community. And this community really helps one another when it comes to opportunities. So, I mean, even as a candidate, especially you are now in level 2, don't be shy, reach out to them. And I think the members are always willing to help, always willing to help. Okay, so we've come to um, close to the end of our session. Is coming to 10 p.m. now. So we would like to thank Eric for sharing his time with us this evening. And of course, we'd like to thank everyone for dialing in and watching this at home. Stay safe. And for those who are celebrating Lunar New Year, 恭喜发财, right? 恭喜发财. And stay safe. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Take care. All the best.